Okay team, so now we've added in 3 layers. These are going to gradually get a bit bigger depending on what we add. What we want to play around with it now a little bit is what we call hue and saturation and also gradient. So if you look over here on the layers palette, I've selected it. I'm going to move my tools back over to the left. Now, in the background I've got a plain green, but perhaps I don't want to have just a plain green. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my bucket tool and I'm going to choose the gradient tool. Now if you have a look up here, there's all sorts of different colors you can choose. You can actually, if you want to play around a little bit longer, you can actually set up your own gradients at different points. These are just standard. This is color to white, color to transparent. So if I change the color down here to a pink, for instance, I come back up here and see it's changed it. Some of these other ones are standard gradients, like a rainbow gradient to transparent, that kind of thing. So you can play around with some of these. This changes where the fade to light goes. So I'm going to try, most of my dominant image is in the middle, so this isn't going to be so interesting probably. So I'm going to try a left to right fade, and I'm going to click in here. I'm going to try this one. This is a bit interesting. And so I'm going to drag that across the background, and you can see now in my layers palette that that's changed. That just adds, it's an interesting color. But I actually want to add a little bit of texture to it as well. And first we're going to play with hue and saturation. So if I click on a layer, I can do a number of things. I can right click, and you look at blending options and play around with how I can change those. I can also change my opacity. I might want it to be a little bit thinner so that it's a bit more see-through. And I'm also now, if I go to my layers palette, I'm going to duplicate it because I want one more just to play with. And so I can go OK, and I can change that opacity even lower or bigger. Now when a layer is duplicated, it comes up as flower copy, or whatever the name of the layer is, copy. And I can leave it like that because that actually makes sense. But it duplicates immediately on the top of where I was. So if I move this, you can see now the second layer comes up. And I'm actually going to move that, and I might spin that around actually just to make it a little bit more interesting. So I'm holding shift, remember, so that my proportion remains the same, and I hit enter. Alright, so now what I want to do is I've added a gradient background. I want to play with the saturation. So I can go image, adjustments, and here you can see a ton of things that you can use to alter the colors, etc. on that layer. Hue and saturation is quite fun. It's changing the background here, you can see. I can make saturation is how bright or vivid the color is, and the hue is the underlying color range. So if I change that, that's quite fun like that. So it's changed this flower, so if I turn it off you can still see everything else looks normal. But it's totally changed that hue or color range of that flower. Now, okay, one last thing I want to show you really quickly is, so I've got this interesting background now. I've got my shadow people. I might make them a little bit more opaque just to play with that. See, that's a bit fun. Now this is turning into what might quite be a nice background of an image, or an image in itself. Now what I quite like the idea of is adding a little bit more texture. This line here bothers me. I think that's on this, yep, that's on this one. So I'm going to go back into that layer. Even if they're transparent here, if I'm clicked on the correct layer, remember if I was clicked on that and I started editing, that's going to edit my shadow. So, and I don't want that. So I'm going to click on the flower copy. I'm going to make this just a teeny bit bigger so that I just need to do one line. And I'm going to click here, hold down shift, go all the way across here. Done. Alright, so now I'm going to stay on my eraser tool, and I'm going to make it tininess. And I'm going to add some texture, and I think I might make it on the shadow people, but I might duplicate them just in case I want another to play with them later, so I'll turn that off in case I don't like it. So here I am, I'm going to click on this one, and I actually want to add, I want to do some deleting like this, and so I've just on the erase tool and I'm adding some deleting because I love the texture that it's giving, and that's size 1, so that's as small as I'm going to be able to get it. And then I kind of want to add another effect to see if I can get a bevel and emboss and see what that happens. Yeah, you can see what's just happened there. It's got those shapes there. I don't love it so much, so I can change here. Oh, that's kind of funky because it's taken on board all the erase. So that's good. So there you go. That's how you can edit. I could now turn this back on, and you can see I can actually change the size or shape or shading of this. I could move it just slightly so you can see that there's another one. Oh, I don't really like that though. So we can turn that off. I can come back in here and change the opacity of that again if I want to. And that's quite an interesting image. So there you go. The last thing I'll show you about layers before we finish this tutorial is when you're ready to print. So I'm going to save this. First of all, I go File, Save As. I'm going to save it as Experiment 2, Photoshop, PS I'll put. I want to click down and save it as a Photoshop document, so just Photoshop is fine. It's going to save to the folder I've got it in already. When I'm ready to print, I always want these layers open, because what we call open and unflattened, because I want to be able to edit them again maybe. But if I want to print, I want to flatten it so that it's a smaller file size. So if you look down the bottom here, before I do this, have a look down here. These file sizes tell you how big they are and how big they are to print. So if I flatten this, boom. Yep, I'm going to get rid of it. I don't want my hidden layers. Have a look down the bottom here. That tells me how big the file is now and how big the file is to print. So now I don't want to save it flattened like that, or else I won't be able to edit it again. So I come back into my file, I go underscore, and at the end I add flat. So you'll end up with two file types, and you can see I'm scrolling down to save as a JPEG because that's also smaller, and I can compress the size. The whole file size after everything and exporting is 180 kilobytes. That's tiny. So you'll end up with two files the same name, except that one of them will be a JPEG and will be underscore flat, and that's how you want to save your files.